This is TWiT.
You will be able to spend exorbitant funds, huge amounts of money on your Mac Pro starting Tuesday, December 10th. Orders will begin. The Mac Pro starts at $6,000. Oh, you wanted a monitor? That'll be another $5,000. Oh, you wanted a monitor stand? That'll be another $1,000. We're at 12 now, and you only have 256 gigs of storage and 32 gigs of RAM. Oh, you wanted more than 8 cores? You can really spend a lot of money. Honestly, this is not a computer for the rest of us. This is a computer for
I'm confused about Apple's product roadmap strategy because, I mean, I had the G5, the earlier, bigger, clunkier version of that machine. I guess we should call this one the cheese grater. If the last one was the
last one we called the
trash
cheese
can.
There's the cheese graters, the vintage ones, then the trash can, and
so
then
I have
this,
the vintage,
which looks more like a cheese grater than the cheese graters does.
So here's what I don't get. I appreciate the fact that it's theoretically modular and that you can theoretically add components and add on your own. I mean, I'm sitting in front of the trash can on my desk, and technically you can take it apart.
No, but you can't
the ports
do anything.
are in a dumb place.
Yeah.
There's not enough ports. The ports are in a really dumb place. The thing gets very, very hot, and ultimately, I'm not editing 4K video. It doesn't have enough power somehow, and I bought a very high-end version. So my question is, between the multi-$1,000, or I guess the $1,000 stand that holds the multi-$1,000 monitor, I don't understand what the product strategy is. Maybe you guys can help me figure it out.
I mean, I think a lot of people are kind of confused with that. I mean, I think the product strategy is that they did actually listen to the feedback from the trash can, which I remember reviewing it back in, I guess, what was that, 2013, 2014, whenever it came out.
It was
and
announced
even then,
2013. Mine arrived early 2014.
Yeah, I reviewed it early.
Years later, there were no upgrades. That was it.
Which was the massive problem, right? I mean, I think that, because what you bought in 2014 wound up being the exact same thing that they are still selling now. Yeah. And to your point, Amy, the ports weren't in a great place. It could overheat. It didn't seem to have enough power, even if you got it the way that it was. It claimed to be modular, but it wasn't really. Yeah, and that was the thing.
2 years ago, Apple brought in some journalists and said, we blew it.
Right.
And so I think this is them listening in part to what the feedback was, which is we really liked having something modular. We really liked being able to bring in other things, which is great. I think the problem is that when you look at the price point and putting the monitor aside, because even though I think that the $1,000 for the stand is idiotic and ridiculous, just include it. If this is what it's going to cost with the stand, just map it in. Having it as a separate thing to me just makes no sense. But I feel like the rest of the industry has moved on from the point where what Apple is charging for what you're getting, you can look at what AMD is doing with Ryzen. You can look at some other things, and people are just going, okay, do I need this? And even Apple, it's sort of confusing because for a lot of people, an iMac Pro or even a 5K iMac, or even the new 16-inch MacBook Pro is going to be more than sufficient for your needs rather than spending $12,000.
Right, but they're also pretty expensive, and so this comes back to my question, which is who are these devices intended for? Because I keep hearing these are high-end models intended not for the masses, but for a rarefied group of professionals working in a particular field. I kind of feel like between the most recent iPhone launch and this new the new iPhone launch, the new Mac Pro, the previous stand, the previous devices, and even the on the MacBook Air, which also has apparently no ports, which makes me crazy.
It has two,
but is on the higher end
they're all
of
the
things.
same.
Right. No, I mean,
my question is I'm not sure. Who's doing the math over there?
Yeah, no.
Well, wait a minute now. Unfortunately, you two have just placed me in the position of Apple apologist, which is the last place in the world I want to be. But to their credit, they're making a lot of money. I mean,
no one's arguing
that. It's not like they're suffering because of their choices.
Are they making? I mean, that's the question.
Oh, yes, of course they're making a lot of money.
They're making money hand over fist. I think that there's an open question: could they be making more money if they were priced slightly differently? Right? I think that's a valid thing to say. When it comes to the Mac Pro itself,
I wouldn't even say that. The PC industry is dying. The
Well, right,
Windows
but I'm talking
machine
about phones.
industry, these companies are
I'm not talking
suffering
about PCs.
with razor-thin margins. Apple has huge margins and is far from dying. They're
But
doing
the
great.
sale-
I'm not
sales
talking, but I'm not talking
are
about PCs, Leo. I'm talking about phones. I mean, I think that you
Phones,
could make
you could make an argument.
I think you
against
can make
that,
and actually they did. The phones are cost less than they did a year ago. They did actually like they lowered the price of the the iPhone 11 compared to the 10R. They came down some there. Even $50 is still a difference. When you look at the Mac Pro, I mean, I think that frankly that only audience in an ideal world you would think that people doing CUDA tasks and doing a lot of ML stuff. The problem is they don't use NVIDIA chips. They use AMD, so that's not even actually a good use case for doing.
NVIDIA has
really
announced that they're going to stop doing drivers for Macintosh, so you won't be able to use.
Right. But my
CUDA
point
chip.
is that even if you were like right now, people who are trying to make that work, whether it's a
Well,
Hackintosh,
you can do it. You could do an eGPU with a Mac and use
you can,
NVIDIA card,
but
you won't be able to going forward.
But my point, Leo, though, would be that if you were buying a $12,000 machine for CUDA stuff, then getting eGPUs is not your best use case. You are actually much better off using a different operating system. That's going to be the platform, and those are going to be the use cases you're doing. Because as good as the Vegas can be for certain use cases, that's just not what they're optimized for.
I think Apple's suffering a little bit here because it's taken them 2 years to create this. I think to their credit, they did listen to high-end pros. Apple, which used to tout the fact that it was a computer for the rest of us many decades ago, clearly this is not the computer for the rest of us, but maybe you could argue that some of their other stuff is. This is a computer as high-end as you can get. It's intended for high-end creative professionals in video, photography, 3D design, 3D rendering. And for those people, if you're doing 8K video or you're doing music with 1,000 tracks, Logic Project, this is, a reasonable expense. They're spending a lot of money for those tools. Those tools are their professional tools. They pay for themselves. Even that expensive monitor is actually cheaper than a high-end monitor.
Yeah, the monitor I don't actually have an issue with.
So this is a market. It's a very small
there's
market.
A market.
And I have to think Apple's whole intent with this was to say, I mean, they got there was a little bit of a black mark on the trash can Mac that Amy and I bought. There's a little bit of a, and so I think what they're saying is, well, if price were no object, we could design the hell out of this thing. So let's do it.
I think that they, from my vantage point, I don't see what the longer term, I don't see a narrative arc in the products.
I'll tell you, here's the narrative arc for this. This is just like Ford building what do they call their race car, the GTO. This is like Ford building a $500,000 race car. Nobody's going to buy that, but it looks good on the track, and people will know Ford can make this, and then that will trickle down. And I think that's what this is. This is their GTO. This is. I
mean, yeah, I agree with you, but I disagree slightly. Like I agree with you, and I think that there is a market for this. They're certainly not looking at selling, massive numbers of these the same way they didn't sell massive numbers of the trash cans. I think what's hurt them though with video editors, because I talk to a lot of them and I've worked with them for many, many years, is that because of the botch of the Final Cut 10 rollout, even though a lot of those things have been, fixed, and then because of the failures around the trash can Mac Pro, many video editors who are largely like at this point very committed to Premiere, it doesn't really matter to them whether they're using a Mac or they're using a PC.
And in fact,
and if you're building a PC, you could build something with Ryzen, the newest AMD Ryzen chip, which is now like a 16-core chip, and that's not even getting into their really high-end stuff. You could build something that would be very, very, comparable for much less money. So, I think you're right.
There is proprietary stuff in here, and that's in a way the negative on this is that it's Apple proprietary. The video cards, the way they're mounted, all of that stuff is kind of Apple proprietary. So you can't build a PC that's exactly the same. But I do think Apple suffered because they've been designing this for years. They missed out on Ryzen. If
they did.
A PC company is much more nimble in the sense that they're cranking out new models all the time. And so they can say, hey, look, this Ryzen chip is better than the current Intel chip. Price, performance, so let's go put a Ryzen chip in there. And next year, Ryzen's going to go 64-core. Apple's going to look silly with their, 28-core Mac Pro. So I think that's just a flaw. And, I don't think this is Apple's bread and butter, though, to be fair. This is their GT. This is their...
It may not be, but I haven't seen a lot of innovation coming out of Apple in a long time. I mean,
You know what's interesting is Apple also doesn't see a lot of growth in their market, which is why they've repositioned themselves as a services company.